Hello, Garland Nixon here on a Thursday night with my good friend, Dr. Tony Monteiro. A lot to talk about, Joe Biden's speech and more. Let's talk. Hi, Garland Nixon here with Dr. Tony Monteiro. And let's see if I can get a little less headroom here and even things up a bit. All right. I'm sure people that have checked out my channel, they've seen you before. Really, I've got a tremendous amount of feedback. Everybody really enjoyed it. So let's go. I wasn't able, had a bunch of things going on. I wasn't able to listen to Joe Biden's speech today. In my opinion, his administration has been a debacle, a disaster. I mean, it's incredibly bad. As Barack Obama got something right when he said to never estimate Joe Biden's ability to F things up. Yeah. So let's start. You watched the speech. Your thoughts, Dr. Monteiro.
Well, thank you for having me, Garland. It's good to be here. I listened carefully to it, and I've been trying to read what the Times and other news outlets are saying about it. I would say that it is the most dangerous speech in terms of war and peace that any president in 80 years has given. What Biden in effect said is that the United States, along with Israel and Ukraine, are at war with Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia. This was supposed to justify the bill that he is sending to the House of Representatives, calling for $60 billion to be sent to Ukraine, $40 billion to be sent to Israel, and something like $10 billion to be sent to Taiwan. All of this is pretty much military assistance. Now, Biden's re-election campaign has moved from Bidenomics, which was a total bust as a campaign slogan, and now he's situating his campaign that he is the president of war. The nation is at war. He just returned from Israel, which is at war, and met with the Israeli war cabinet, and a day after he returns, he gives this speech. My conclusion, in 2024, this president and this administration has to be driven from office. I don't think we can play with this. The issue is war and peace. And not only regional conflicts, but world war. As Biden is admitting with this emergency budget request, the Israeli army has to be rebuilt. And we could talk about that. It is not an army that is capable of fighting or that wants to fight. So the $40 billion is really to rebuild a broken army, a broken institution, which would be defeated. Frankly, if they go into Gaza, I think the Israeli army will suffer casualties beyond anything that is politically acceptable to the Israeli public at this time. The other thing is that Biden talking about $60 billion to Ukraine wants to rebuild the Ukrainian army after its really catastrophic setbacks, apropos its counter-offensive from the spring to the summer, which is now over, which was a debacle for the Ukrainian army and for the Ukrainian government and for NATO, of course. And then I think a bit of a surprise, at least for me, is to confront China by sending military aid to Taiwan, which is not a sovereign nation, a nation which the United States does not have diplomatic relationships with, or any of that, and $10 billion of military aid, so-called military aid for them. I would just say a couple of other things. There are already 2 aircraft carrier strike groups in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Gerald R. Ford and the Dwight D. Eisenhower, with all of the support vessels, including cruisers and warships, and perhaps submarines. Aircraft carriers not only carry aircraft, but they carry nuclear weapons and missiles, as would the support vessels in this armada. This is nothing short of gunboat diplomacy. It is to so-called, quote, send a message to Iran and to Hezbollah and to the Arab nations, including Egypt and Syria, that the United States is prepared to back Israel up with military force. The other thing is that there are 2,000 troops somewhere out in the Eastern Mediterranean that are prepared to either go into Lebanon and fight Hezbollah, which would be a disaster for the U.S. forces, or to assist the Israeli IDF in Gaza, which would be very, very dangerous for American troops. The American army is not trained to wage urban guerrilla warfare, nor is the Israeli army. My final point. If Biden thinks that this is going to bump up his poll numbers and give him an advantage in the in the election to reelect him, I think he's going to be sorely disappointed. The American people cannot support war in Ukraine and in the Middle East while funds for schools, for cities, all the major cities are now going to austerity budgets. They're cutting back things and raising taxes on sales taxes and real estate taxes and whatever other kind of tax they can find on the working people. So much needed aid to people, the working poor, the working class is needed, but billions and billions of dollars are going to be sent to fight these wars. So Biden is going against the sentiment of the American people who are war weary, are tired of wars in the Middle East. The other thing is that not only does this talk of billions of dollars for Ukraine and Israel go against what the American people say they want, Biden faces a big problem with his own party, where it is now, through polling data, shown that maybe a majority or close to a majority of Democrats look upon Israel as an oppressor, as an apartheid regime, and so on. It is in this atmosphere that we see the development of a movement that looks very similar to the early days of the anti-Vietnam War movement. Students taking the lead, but of great significance. By the way, huge demonstrations. I understand the one on Wednesday at the Canon office building in DC, some of the organizers said there were 10,000 people altogether, including 300 inside. Last week, there was a huge demonstration in Chicago of about 15,000. And then huge marches in Dearborn, Michigan, and here in Philadelphia, we've had a steady parade of marches every day. This Friday, there's to be a demonstration where students in high schools walk out. On Saturday, another demonstration. The Philadelphia City Council passed a resolution condemning Hamas over the very angry and vocal protest of citizens in the city council, saying that the city council of the city of Philadelphia was merely providing aid and comfort to the Israeli Zionist apartheid regime. So that's the picture that I see right now.
You know, if you could comment on this, one of the things that you've talked about, and I think it's important, is the crisis of the ruling elite and their right to rule. How they have our ruling elite has totally disconnected from the working class, the working poor, and the poor. And we have a ruling elite now. If I look at, as an example, the Republicans unable to get a House Speaker.
Yeah.
The Democrats taking positions on Israel that is not favored by the majority of their constituents, and it's obvious that they're already doing, you know, whether it's RFK Jr., they're trying to put Trump in jail, that they're taking extra legal and extra democratic actions to try to game the system because they can't win, you know, any other way. Your thoughts about the crisis of the ruling elite class, the ruling class?
There's no question. It's what political scientists, liberal bourgeois political scientists, call a crisis of legitimacy. There's no major institution in the United States that is not below water in public approval. Of course, Biden, the president, is in the low 40s, more or less, of approval, and 55% disapprove of him. And when you take his economic policies and his policies on the border and immigration, even his policies as relates to inflation, his numbers are very, very low. And especially among working people. And I think at some point we have to get back and talk about where Black folk are at this critical moment, because Black people will decide by what they do who wins the 2024 presidential election. But another way to put this is that the ruling elite cannot rule in the old way, if they can rule at all. And don't look at the high-sounding phrases that come out of Washington and the bureaucrats that run the government. Come to your local city, like in Philadelphia, and I'm certain Baltimore and New York, major parts of New York, Chicago, but Philadelphia, the poorest of the big cities. And it is that. It is really that. The city is poorer, more unequal, more divided, less educated than any time that I've lived here, and I've lived here all my life. So the urban crisis, the crisis of urban poverty, of urban hunger, of education only gets worse, and inflation is rising again. And you know, the Biden administration keeps talking about jobs. In fact, in the speech that he gave tonight, he was saying that yes, by investing in militarism, we are creating jobs for the American people. That Raytheon will build the missiles and bullets and, on and on. So he's trying to make the case, which I think is very difficult to make to the American people at this point, that war benefits the poor and the working class. And not like Martin Luther King so brilliantly put it, war is the enemy of the poor. This is a crisis unlike any we in this country in memory have experienced. There has never been anything like this. And then an irresponsible, globalist, neocon, neoliberal administration with the support of the mainstream media are playing this brinksmanship with other great powers who have nuclear weapons, and a country where the people are saying we don't want war. We went through over 20 years of war in the Middle East. What did it get us as a nation? So I think it is, I agree with the way you put it, we're at, Biden called it an inflection point. That seems to be the word of the day, the phrase of the day. This is a historic political crisis, a historic crisis.
I was looking at some of the economic indicators today. Mm-hmm. Mortgage rates at a 30-year high.
Wow.
Meanwhile, basically, of course, as a result, the applications for home loans and mortgage loans have absolutely cratered. Mm-hmm. We know the direction that's going. We've got now school students have to pay school loans again, which again, to me, the whole concept that rather than invest in education in your nation, you use your students for rent. You use your students and say, yes, you can get an education, but you will now have a home mortgage for the next 40 years and no home. The system itself is economically not viable. The system is disastrous right now. Your thoughts on the economic, like when George Bush, let me tell you this, when George Bush left, we thought, is there anything he can't screw up? Well, we found that, yeah, there really was. But the economic system, to me now, is in collapse. When you're this far in debt, when you have indebted the people of the nation, mm-hmm. They've even found things like you drive around, you get a speeding ticket, a light, you go through a red light, you're getting a ticket there. They found so many ways to extract money from the population now that the government doesn't work for us. It's parasitical on us. Anyway, your thoughts on the economics of this mess?
I think the economics are very important, but we have to understand the economics of this time. We can't go back to the analysis during the 1930s and the Great Depression, or even the writings of John Maynard Keynes, who was the great theorist of saving Western capitalism. None of that will work. And the reason why that won't work in these times is that the government is in $33 trillion of debt. That is the federal government, $33 trillion of debt. The whole gross domestic product of the United States is $23 trillion. So the economy, in a certain sense, is underwater. Now, we haven't talked about student debt, mortgages, credit card debt. If you throw all of that in, because many people are living off of their credit cards and trying to pay mortgages that are off the charts. So if you put all of it together, the indebtedness of the nation, including government, private, corporate debt, we're looking at something well over $100 trillion, well beyond that. We just don't know. And then while this debt is increasing, the debt itself is a trigger for inflation. Because what happens is that the government is spending money that it does not have, that it will never have, and thus it borrows money. If you get high borrowing, let us say from the government, those who are loaning the money will raise the interest on that debt. Raising that interest, the interest that is paid on the debt, fuels inflation, because inflation begins with inflating the money supply. And then wages are trying to catch up with prices. And you get a vicious cycle. Inflation is what undid the German economy in the 1920s. It could be argued, and I'm not a professional economist, so I don't know all of the debates. It could be argued that the crash of 1929 that led to the Great Depression was caused by excessive speculation on the future. I don't think what was going on then carries a candle to what is going on now. We live in what could be called, some people call a casino economy, a speculative economy, where people enter the markets to make a quick profit and then leave. Or what they acquire, they try to sell at higher prices. What is happening in terms of the financial architecture of the world economy is still trying to be explained. I spend a lot of time sometimes listening to a guy named Adam Tooze, who writes for the New York Times, sometimes for the Financial Times, and he has a podcast. And he calls it trying to understand the deep plumbing of the financial system. And he is an expert on it, and he has to admit it is still unclear to him how all of these parts are working. And again, the other perhaps large contradiction, which is in some ways external to the political economy, let us say, of the United States or of the Western capitalist countries, is the rise of the Asian powers. And when we talk about Asia, we're talking about China, we're talking about India, but indeed we're talking about Russia, which has always been an Asian nation geographically and in a lot of ways civilizationally. So Asia is Saudi Arabia, Asia is Iran, Asia is Palestine. Asia is this huge continent which is rising and finding ways to unite. I would just one small factor here is the Belt and Road conference being held in Beijing, where I think 120 or so countries showed up. This is huge because this alternative economy and alternative currencies makes the US dollar less powerful and less able to call the shots either in world trade and investment or politically through declaring sanctions on other nations. The dollar is losing its privileged position in the world economy, and it's being replaced by any number of currencies, probably a basket of currencies. But this globalist idea that the United States would be the superpower, the indispensable nation, and we would, through economic power or military power, or sometimes, quote, soft power, decide humanity's future. Those days are over. Biden trying to fight, now let me just say this last word, trying to fight a rear guard action to make up for what has been lost, but to do it through brinksmanship and provocation and talk of war and encouraging nations that don't need war, like Ukraine, like Israel, like the Palestinians. The Biden administration is trying to promote that, which would be disastrous for the world economy and for peace and democracy.
You know, one of the things that concerns me right now, I've been following closely what's going on in the Middle East, and I have a friend who is in Beirut, who is a journalist who fills me in regularly. And talking to him, it appears to me that the people in the Middle East see this almost as a civilizational conflict, like the Crusades. And that, I mean, he was sending me information today where there were literally convoys of 1,000 cars and buses from Iraq heading to the border. Volunteers who were saying, "Let me join."
You say
Yes, from Iraq, going to the border of Israel, saying, "We are coming to fight." And they expected to get convoys, 1,000 vehicles or more, to join them, right? When I'm looking there, now we have the U.S. bases. Today, we saw some of the bases get hit by mortars, by various rounds and things in Syria, in Iraq. And the local militias are saying, if anything kicks off, all U.S. bases are targets. We see there a couple of ships off the coast of Yemen had a couple missiles shot at them today. My interpretation of that was it was a brushback. It was an elbow. It wasn't an attack. It was a reminder, if this thing goes down, I think the way I see it is in the Middle East right now, that the Muslim world, we would literally be at war with the Muslim world, that the Muslim world would say, the United States is going to come on behalf of Israel. We will make sure that the United States is defending all of their bases, all of their installations, all of their embassies throughout the Middle East, so much so that they're not going to be able to help Israel because they're going to be fending off attacks themselves. I see this, if this goes down, certainly, as you said, if Israel goes into urban warfare, they are not. This is not, SEAL Team 6 going in here with Israel. These are weekend warriors that they brought up to go wandering through the rubble for hardened, angry fighters who just got their families bombed to pieces. But I look at that and I say, and one more thing, the Taliban released a statement and they said, if the other Arab leaders want to see a war, give us safe passage to border Israel and you can watch a war. I don't know if these people understand what they're playing with. You cannot fight 1.5 billion Muslims. There's no state actor to push back on. You have a civilizational war, and there's no possibility of winning that one. And it could go worldwide. Your thoughts on the danger that we're looking at here, Dr. Monteiro?
I think you're very right. And the way you put it, a war of civilizations. But to be for real about it, colonialism was a civilizational clash. And the establishment, as it turned out, of the state of Israel, which, by the way, is not a Jewish state, it's a Zionist state, and more Jews in the United States and hopefully in other parts of the world are making this clear. There was, the Jewish Voices for Peace rally, where a woman rabbi from Philadelphia and other rabbis who were part of the demonstration said that they were demonstrating upholding Judaism, arguing that Israel is not a Judaic state, it is a Zionist state and a colonialist state. They said that. the other thing is, and I'm certain this is known to wide sections of the Israeli population and to many Jews who look upon Israel as their real home, and here, just a lot of them where they just live for the time being. So they follow Israeli politics very, very closely. And I heard Lawrence Wilkerson, I think you know who he is, the colonel who served in at least two Republican administrations,
Yes.
George H.W. Bush and George Bush, and was the advisor to Colin Powell, you know. I heard him give an interview in a discussion where he referred to the right wing of the Netanyahu government, cabinet, as Nazis. Now, you know, this is not a guy that is prone to a lot of rhetoric. He's very careful. He's been in government. He knows the Middle East. He knows the Israeli political players. And he says that far right, which made it possible for Netanyahu to come to government power, he said among them are open Nazis. Well, one thing we do know about them is that they believe that Palestine and Israel are Judea and Sumeria, the ancient home of the ancient Hebrew people, and that they are reclaiming it, including the destruction of Al-Aqsa Mosque. So, yes, Netanyahu is not for a two-state solution, but he's not for equal citizenship in a one state of the Palestinians and other Arab people. Okay, so if that is the case, the one-state solution is a civilizational replacement of a European and really a Euro-American Zionist regime to replace the possibility of two states where in that part of the world. This is a prescription for unbridled war. If I could just say one other thing, and this is speculative because there's a lot of talk about who bombed the hospital. Well, we all know Israel bombed the hospital, you know, and this foolishness about, you know, Biden, it's the other team and all of that nonsense. But who in Israel did this on the day that Biden was leaving Washington to go to Israel? Well, I think those neo-Nazi forces in the Israeli government and military called for that to happen as a provocation and a way to draw the American military into a prolonged war, not just to destroy Hamas, but to destroy Hezbollah, to destroy the Palestinian Authority and Fatah, to destroy any indication of a Muslim civilization in the Middle East. And hence, as you say, these wars are increasingly civilizational wars, where they are not just about overthrowing or pushing back a government, let us say World War I and World War II. They were not about overturning and destroying civilization. These wars, and certainly as articulated by the Biden administration, are indeed civilizational wars, and they are increasingly painting their opponents and competitors as threats to Western civilization, which they often in order to disguise their real hand called democracy.
You know, and it's interesting you mentioned that Colonel Wilkerson referred to these people as Nazis, because to me, when I hear the term Nazi in modern day America, in our society, what I hear is, I think what people mean is the most extreme form of fascism. That we can, if we can think of a word for the most extreme form of fascism, that would be it. That being said, Ukraine, the United States literally supports a proud goose-stepping Nazis, people who praise the figures from the Nazi era, who sport the iconography of the Third Reich. And add this, your thoughts on this.
Well,
Canada,
again,
the Canadian Parliament, a literal
Canada,
Nazi.
of course, Canada.
Yes, a literal Nazi. Your thoughts on all of that? But in the Canadian, the incident in the Canadian Parliament in the context of these other things.
Well, it's the dirty secret that all Western governments have, that all of them protected Nazis, especially from places like Poland and Ukraine, because they wanted to use them in the Cold War, which could be hot wars in the period from, let us say, 1945 up till today. The Ukrainian Nazis and Polish Nazis and, German Nazis were given protection in the Western countries because they were anti-Soviet and anti-communist. And so the residue, the filth of that remains in Ukraine, was a decisive part of the overthrowing of the democratically elected government in 2014, the Maidan uprising, so-called. All of the Nazi groups in Ukraine were part of that, of killing people who were unionists, trade unionists, intellectuals. Now they're going after priests and church leaders and so on. But one can only conclude that the deep underbelly of the Ukrainian government is populated by Nazis and people loyal to the ambitions and aims of Adolf Hitler, including the killings of millions of Ukrainians. A lot of people don't understand this, but I am in complete agreement that the way these wars are being argued for is unlike the argument for any wars, maybe in human history or modern human history. These are wars that are framed as the struggle of civilizations. The guy that first put this forward, of course, was Samuel P. Huntington, the Harvard professor. He wrote a book, I think it came out in around 88 or 89, called A Clash of Civilizations. And at that point, he said the main struggle between Western democracy and freedom and its opposite was between Islamic civilization and Western civilization. Well, they've expanded that now. It's Chinese civilization. It's Russian civilization. It's Arab civilization. So this is what we're looking at. And I'll say it again, and I think it's an inconvenient truth for a lot of us, but we're going to have to face it. This administration, in the interest of peace in the world, has to be driven from office. There can be no safe quarter for Biden or his administration. And I'm very encouraged by what is going on among the American people. Even as Biden was delivering that speech tonight, I think they could hear drifting through the White House, the West Wing, the protesters outside of the White House. And it seems that those protesters are just going to remain there 24/7 for as long as it takes. And for the first time in a long time, we see arising out of the Jewish community people who are prepared to tell the truth about Israel and not be intimidated by the wealth of wealthy Jews or the power of powerful Jews who could make or break careers. Oh, by the way, I just read that 2,000 British actors and writers signed a statement condemning Israel for violations of human rights and genocide. This is very important, and I'm certain if it happened in England, somebody might have the ear of progressive actors and screenwriters and so on here. A similar petition might happen here. And again, all due respect to the courageous students at Harvard University, 34 organizations, student organizations, signing a statement for peace, and then they're having been doxxed by a cabal of both right-wing neocons and, quote, liberal neocons and so-called philanthropists who think they can buy the opinions of people. All respect to those students and to all of the people who have been demonstrating around the clock throughout this country. This is great. This is great news, because our first, as American citizens, our first obligation is to stay the hand of the war makers in the United States, to stay the hand. And of course, who are the war makers? People try to hedge on war and peace like Robert F. Kennedy. He's going to have to get it right. He's going to have to get it right. A lot of people will leave the Democratic Party and seek a place to go. They won't necessarily go to Trump. They'll find a home with Robert F. Kennedy, but not as long as he has this position on the Middle East. It's horrible. Doesn't make any sense. It's a cowardice position, and I think his former campaign manager, Dennis Kucinich, left on that point. And he said, I will not be on the wrong side of history in this one.
Let me ask you this. We mentioned these liberals.
Mm-hmm.
As a lefty myself, I'm a real lefty. As I've told people, my mentor was Paul Robeson Jr. That's the left there. It's workers. It's anti-fascism. It's real standing up against fascism, not pretending to wear black and a motorcycle helmet and call yourself Antifa or some foolishness like that. It's saying, I recognize fascism when I see it, and I see it in the White House right now. It is recognizing that ultra-nationalism may be fascism, but ultra-liberalism is also fascism. And now what we're looking at is people who say, okay, if I have a rainbow flag, if I have a Black Lives Matter mask, and if I have every advertisement you see come out of Hollywood, they've got a black person, a white person, they've got a Latino person. You know what I mean? It looks like a Benetton advertisement. That if they do that, that somehow demonstrates their morality. But yet they will support the bombing of hospitals, the murder, and the impoverishment in that same Hollywood. You go to Los Angeles right now and walk through there. There's homelessness, there's tents everywhere. But for some reason, because they have a gay couple and a mixed couple on every advertisement for toilet paper, now all of a sudden we're supposed to believe that they're standing up for what's right and just. Your thoughts on these modern ultra liberals?
Well, liberalism, ultra liberal, we're in, as the world changes, we're challenged to change a lot of our definitions. Like you said, you are a genuine leftist. There are a lot of people who are performative and superficial leftists. Leftism is a way of virtue signaling rather than a substantive movement. Opposition to war is to be left. Opposition to a regime that is committed to war is to be left. Therefore, I don't consider Bernie Sanders left. I don't consider most of the squad to be left. And, you know, of course, they, I think, all went along with funding for Ukraine, although a couple of them are coming out against what is going on in Gaza. But the fact of the matter is, fascism is defined first and foremost by its commitment to war. And I think we have to be careful in throwing these terms around. If you don't like a person, that person is a fascist. If you don't agree with he or she is a fascist. We had this in the early months of this year with the 2 marches for peace when there should have been 1. And then one march was deemed to be the right wing and the other march was deemed to be the left wing. That type of fragmenting and disuniting of the people is not worthy of being left. The leadership of the AFL-CIO, what are you collaborating with? You know, it's what we call their position, and that of Bernie Sanders and AOC and others, is what we call social imperialism. The idea that you can have social uplift and betterment at home while pursuing war and world war abroad. You can't have guns and butter. You never could. Even during the Johnson administration, to fund the war in Vietnam, they had to cut the war against poverty at home. But even more so today, it is either going to be war and austerity or peace and social economic development for the people. You can't have the two together. I forget exactly your question because this.
It was about the modern day, the liberals, whether it's the Hollywood liberals, the Biden liberals, etc.
Yeah, I get
the Nazi-loving liberals, I might add. I might add this, that when they gave a standing applause, they're lionizing a Nazi war criminal in Parliament, there was radio silence afterwards from the liberals in America. There was radio silence. People condemned it all over and said, well, this is unthinkable. How could they do such a thing? Even Poland said, hey, wait, you're going a little too far here. And there was radio silence from Hollywood. There was radio silence from the White House. These liberal, the so-called liberals we have now. And might I add, I'm no Trump fan. I'm a lefty. He certainly don't align with him ideologically, but he has a right to run. And it is clear that they are using lawfare to go after Donald Trump and anyone that's near him.
Well, I think, you know, since you brought up Donald Trump, you know, I've often talked about, and I try to look at this objectively as you can, to scientifically attempt to understand where the country is. And one thing we have to say, the center has not held. You know, U.S. government and politics are based upon what Arthur Schlesinger called the vital center. You know, you have liberals and conservatives, this is their language, of course, but after an election or when it comes to foreign policy, they come together in the vital center. The center has not held. The center has collapsed. And it has collapsed not because the ruling elite are incapable, and they are incapable, they're less capable now given the crisis that they confront. But the center collapsed because the people reject it. They reject what is called the center, the rational, pragmatic center, which they see as a cover for anti-working class, anti-poor people policies, such as gay marriage. Gay marriage, good, but that's not a substitute for war against poverty. Trans rights, well, good. But that's not a substitute for the building of a peace industrial economy, as opposed to a military industrial economy. Well, the three oppositional figures in this election, Trump, RFK, and Cornel West, very contradictory figures. You know, if you ask me, I'm not satisfied with either of them, you know, and find ideological and other differences across the board, you know. However, they represent something among the people. If you take the three of them together, they represent well more than the majority of the electorate. I mean, that triad of opposition, and they have a common point. All three of them oppose funding the war in Ukraine. Big takeaway. All three of them oppose the national security state and the Justice Department with the FBI spying upon people. They all oppose the use of social media and then, of course, the mainstream media to shut down discussion and to smear people. I think going forward, first of all, Black folk, we cannot go into this election blinded by fear of the unknown. We have to be purposeful. We have to be clear-sighted. We have to know what our agenda is. And our agenda is not Black Lives Matter. Our agenda, as Martin Luther King in his last speeches said, and I think King becomes the measure of what is left and what is progressive, even in this time, when he said that there cannot be justice at home, including racial justice, as long as there's war abroad. The primary agenda of Black folk must be peace abroad, an end to austerity and a cutback of social services, and a peace economy and a war against poverty and all of its effects on the population, including off the charts drug addiction, depression, and other illnesses, psychological, spiritual conditions. I think we're going to have to go beyond the Black misleadership class. The Congressional Black Caucus is pretty much a zero to me. And if it's for me and you, for most Black people who don't know who they are, and they just follow orders from people running the Democratic Party. Black folk are going to have to break with that. And there are already signs of it. I mean, you know, I talk a lot about Philadelphia because I know this place. And, you know, we just had a primary to decide who would be the Democratic candidate for mayor, and ultimately the mayor, because we don't have many Republicans here. And 75% of registered Black voters didn't come out to vote. If that is translated to 2024 and the presidential race, Biden cannot win because the Democrats win the state of Pennsylvania in presidential races based upon the black vote in Philadelphia. That's
And a
what
number of other states. It's the same thing. A
the
black vote.
same thing.
Let me give you a quick anecdote.
Okay.
Last week, I have a cousin. He's from Baltimore. He grew up in the Baltimore, a working class community. His father was a mail carrier,
Yeah.
right? So at the time that he grew up, he was well-to-do. That was considered well-to-do in the black community, but it was still he was Baltimore and he was around and he went to Forest Park High. So basically, he knew what time it was on the streets, if you know what I'm saying. He ended up getting a master's degree, having a decent job, family, what have you. But he's still culturally, he's got the city in him. You know what I mean? And I said to him, I was talking to him last week, and he was a Democrat, blah, 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 voted for Biden. And I asked him what he thought. And he started talking to me about it was sure better under Trump than it was Biden. And he said to me, so I said, let me ask you a question. Because it's obvious he's done. He's not voting. He's exactly what you said. He ain't voting for nobody, for either one of them. And I said, let me ask you a question. If somebody put a gun to your head and said to you, you have to choose Trump or Biden, right? And he was a person that was saying 4 years ago, we got to make sure we all get out the Biden and do the right thing, blah, blah, blah. I said, but if somebody put a gun to your head, said, you got to choose Trump or Biden, what would you? He said, oh, that ain't even a thought. Come on, that he was like, that's not even a thought. Of course, I'd have to vote for Trump, which surprised me because when he said that ain't even a thought, knowing his ideological and political history, I just knew he was going to say I have to vote for the Democrat. But it was, of course, I'd have to vote for Trump. Now, here's a guy that don't like Trump, but he is it's almost like when you start talking about Biden, it's almost like that somebody stands, you see a look on his face like if you walk up and there's a rotten fish and you smell it and it turns your stomach. That's the look he has on his face.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that?
Oh, I agree with you. Just from Philadelphia, black voters, I'm not talking about people, voters, are completely turned off and disgusted by the Democratic Party. We feel we have been used. We feel, as Malcolm said, we've been took, we've been had, we've been bamboozled, and we have been. This identity politics or representational politics. Oh, there's a black woman vice president. So why aren't we happy? Well, go to the market, try to fill your car up with gas, look at your utility bills, and you'll know why we're unhappy. And then a city like Philadelphia, which in a lot of ways is ungovernable. The murder rate is off the chain. I think we have one of the highest murder rates in the whole country. Schools are not educating young people. 46% drop out before graduation. The unions have been busted, and most workers don't have a union. And many working people in Philadelphia are working 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet. Yes, this is a crisis of the legitimacy of the Democratic Party, especially among black people and most particularly among black men. It is not unusual to hear a black man saying what your cousin said. I hear it all the time. They do not like the Democratic Party and they do not like Biden. First of all, they think that he is not running things. He's a symbolic president. And there are people writing his speeches and deciding policy for him. So that's a big question. But black men, I think, I'll tell you the truth, I think 30% of black men are going to vote for Trump.
I think you're right.
RFK.
I think you're right. I think the Democrats have no idea what's coming. I think a lot of black folks, because, and this is the way I put it, black folks overall, and people have always said, well, the Obama helped black, or politicians help black people. And I say, well, look, again, my idea, my concept of left is workers of the world unite. My concept of the left is that I was taught in the left that I believe is view politics through the lens of economic class, right? And so black folks fall in America, what? Working class, working poor, poor. Forget I'm going to help black folks or I'm going to help white folks. If you help policies that help the working class, the working poor, and the poor, it'll help white people in Appalachia. It'll help black folks in rural Mississippi, or everybody. It has to be an economic class thing. And I think that that's what's happening. Black folks in the working class, that were in the working class, are now in the working poor.
Right.
Or now in the poor. People are going downhill and they're saying, you told me if I voted for you. And what do I get? A semi-black woman who is who you would be embarrassed to run. The Democratic Party itself would be embarrassed. They know they can't run Kamala. They're keeping Joe Biden stumbling around out there, doesn't even really know what's going on. And to me, the main reason is because they've got someone behind them that is so blatantly incompetent that they'd be too, they know they can't run her.
No, they can't. And that's probably the most intense battle within the Democratic Party. Kamala Harris is the Obama team, and Biden Clinton is the opposite camp. That is a bitter fight. And I think the way Kamala was treated in the White House and how they used her for different things like the border, was because first of all, Biden never forgave her for what she did in that debate, calling him a racist. But the other thing was they were not going to give the Obamas a hand up, a leg up in the political struggle to control the Democratic Party. And we have to remember that it was operatives connected to the Obamas that pushed for her, that is Kamala, to be vice president. It's a real it's a conundrum for the Democrats and the ruling class, because let us not get it confused. The dominant forces in the country are assembled in the Democratic Party. The Republicans are a minor party, and there is an existential struggle going on within that party, as is the case within the Democratic Party.
If I may, Tony,
Yes.
if I may add something to it. And oddly enough, although ideologically I'm not aligned with either party, but the Republican Party is to the right, certainly not. The Republican Party is actually healthier. As a political party, it's healthier. If even for all I've got against the Republican Party, but just as a matter of a political entity, if you have someone in the back of the room that will stick their hand up and say, I don't agree with what we're doing, and then you got to fight it out, that is a healthy dynamic, even though the Republican Party is far but anything attractive, and they're the kings of austerity. They're a neoliberal party in the same way the Democrats and the war party, blah, blah, blah. But just from the perspective of the health of the group, AOC, Bernie Sanders, when they say we're sending money to Nazis, and people, literally constituents of these people, go to meetings and they stick their hand up in the back of the room and they say, Rashida Tlaib, AOC, Bernie Sanders, hey, I have a problem with us sending money to Ukraine. And they attack their constituents. Bernie Sanders, who's paying you? They attack the constituents who have the unmitigated gall to question them, the people that they voted in, that question them. So my point is, as bad as both parties are, there's the Republican Party, this battle that we're seeing, that the Democrats are looking, oh, look at that, they're fighting over each other. They can't get a House Speaker. I agree that the system is unstable, and that shows that the system is unstable, but it also shows that at least they got somebody in their party that'll say, I don't like what we're doing. Democratic Party, everybody, I've never seen anything like it. In all my years as a Democratic Party, there was Paul Wellstone. There was somebody that would say, hey, I don't like what we're doing. Nobody, nothing. Tony.
Yeah, not to mention what the Congressional Black Caucus was 30 or 40 years ago and what you have today with Gregory Meeks, the worst of the neocons, a disgrace and embarrassment to Black people and the memory of the civil rights movement. Terrible. But it's hard. We can talk about Republicans and Democrats. Robert F. Kennedy left the Democratic Party, although he's still linked to it. I was at his announcement that he's going to run as an independent. I was not that impressed with the way he argued for it, but I was impressed that this family icon of the Democratic Party and American liberalism leaves the Democratic Party and will run as an independent. Robert F. Kennedy will take large numbers of people with him who want the type of Democratic Party that he says, that is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says he's for, and that is a Democratic Party committed to world peace and justice. Leave it there in a general way. I was very disappointed when Cornell decided that he didn't want the Green Party nomination. I mean, let's talk real politics. Real politics is the politics of compromise, the politics of give and take. And there are enough people in the Green Party, such as Jill Stein, who was Cornell's campaign manager for a while, and Ajamu Baraka, who Cornell always talks about. There were more reasons to stay in that party than to leave it, unless Cornell wanted to leave the election itself. That is to say, the Green Party would put him on the ballot in maybe 30 states or maybe 40 states. You just never know. But that would be a wide expanse. And I'm certain a lot of his, quote, liberal friends, some of whom I might name, came to him and said, look, you don't want to be held responsible for the election of Trump, who you yourself call a neo-fascist thug. So Cornell dropped out. I mean, he's making great statements, and there are a lot of Black people who wanted him to stay in the race because they wanted to vote for him, just like you. I mean, Biden is no way. I think anybody that argues for the re-election of Biden has to also be held responsible for the devastation and chaos that could ensue from wars in Europe and in the Middle East and off of the shores of China. If this is what you support, stand up and own it. Own it. If you will support a candidate of war, then you have to own it. And, I compare it to 1968, where protests against the war in Vietnam were growing. And Eugene McCarthy and then Robert F. Kennedy Sr. got in the primary race. And they quickly disposed of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at the moment where he was going to be the man in the Democratic Party. Johnson would drop out. I mean, I think there's some comparisons. I think, by the way, Biden is going to drop out. He can't.
I agree.
He can't run. And if he drops out, it will be a debacle for the neocon militarist foreign policy. Be a political defeat at home. And that's where the defeat has to come from. The American people must deliver the decisive blow against the war makers of this country. And we can do it. And it's not going to be, us all holding hands, singing Kumbaya. It'll be real politics, compromise, difference. You know what I'm saying? I don't like Trump. I don't like a lot of his style. But I do understand when he attacks NATO and says that it should come to an end. That's what he was talking about. I resonate when he says he is looking at pardoning Edward Snowden. Things like this. When he does not demonize Putin, Xi Jinping, or Kim Jong-un of North Korea, does not demonize them. In fact, he does the opposite. So that is important. The war makers, the war party, which are Republicans and Democrats, have to be defeated. The war party wants the re-election of Biden. That is, Republicans, they call them rhinos sometimes, but the Republicans are fighting the usual Republicans, Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell, you name them. I mean, but it is a party, that part of the, quote, Republicans are a party of war. Marjorie Taylor Greene is not a part of that part. Vacillating, not yet fully clear on the Middle East. You know what I'm saying? But you have 3 oppositional candidates, objectively, who oppose the war party, objectively. And no problem faced by the American people can be solved as long as hundreds of billions of dollars continue to go for wars, proxy wars and direct wars, and maybe even nuclear war.
Absolutely. Let me ask you about this. Your thoughts on the American, and I use this word guardedly, the media.
Oh, please. I don't know. There's nothing I can say that would be significant or profound that everybody doesn't know. The American media is no longer a objective reporting of the news and a site for debate and so on. The American media has become the propaganda arm of the ruling elite and the war makers. Pure and simple. Now, we have the internet and YouTube and Twitter and other ways that the people are making their voices heard. But just like we operate in these spheres where we can have a voice, the enemy is operating there as well. So, but they do not have a monopoly on knowledge and information like they would want to. In fact, I think Tucker Carlson is more popular since he's left Fox. Hundreds of millions of people follow him. And then you have like your podcast, others like Alexander McCouris, and
Well, if I may,
yeah.
I think one of the things that we're seeing, the numbers for CNN, MSNBC cratering, Tucker Carlson left, Fox, a number of people left. One of the positive things I think that we can mention, we get towards the end of things, but one of the positive things is that there is a massive outflow of people from the mainstream media to alternative media. I can name so many. I have a friend of mine has a boat. He's a boat mechanic, and he has a business where he repairs boats, and his son works with him. I was over there talking with him. They do the work on my boat,
Yeah.
and I was talking, just talking to his son about odds and ends. And I was saying, "Oh, what do you watch?" Because he was saying, "Yeah, Garland, you used to be on Fox News. My dad told me he used to watch you." I said, "Yeah," and I said, "Do you watch the news?" He said, "No, he's in his late 20s." He says, "Oh, no, I don't watch any of it." He says, "All I watch is like YouTube and Rumble and stuff like that." So we're getting a new generation of people and so many people now won't even turn on the mainstream media. He said, "All I watch is various YouTube shows, Rumble, Rockfit, whatever the things like that." So we're getting, I think a positive thing is we're getting alternative media and people. I mean, I'll put it like this. I can't watch TV. Let me ask you this. What do you think of this? I want to get your comment on this. I got to get your, I mentioned on it earlier. It's starting to really aggravate me. Every advertisement I see, Black person, a white person, a Latino person, the gay couple. You know what I mean? It's crowded with people because it's like they're like, "Oh, did we miss a group?" There's a new superhero movie out. It's three proud women who are fighting toxic masculinity, and they're going to demonstrate us. You know what I mean? Every movie, everything now that we see. I go back to a time when Leave It to Beaver.
Mm-hmm.
When every show was everybody was white. There was nobody, there was nothing on there but pure white, what they wanted to say, this is what America looks like, right?
Yeah.
When I see what they're doing now, to me, in a weird way, it's the same thing, if you know what I mean. It's contrived. It's trying to pretend to us because they put a Black person and a white person and a Muslim person and a mixed couple and this and that, that somehow if we see that on an advertisement or a movie, that means things are okay.
Yeah.
It just aggravates me. I hate to, I don't know, maybe do you know what I'm saying? It just grates my nerves. Go ahead. Your thoughts on that, Tony?
First of all, it's very insulting to Black people in the Black struggle for freedom. It is also insulting to the working class struggle. And, one of the things I want to mention is that the United Automobile Workers Union is still out on strike, and we're not hearing anything about that. I am very concerned that what they will get will be, crumbs from the table. I think electrical vehicles, and they're being built in the South and by non-union labor, and 40% fewer workers are needed to produce electrical vehicles than the regular ones. This is going to be a holocaust for the automobile union and for the auto industry, and they're keeping those workers out. This is bitter, and Biden went there and made a showing, but I am very, very concerned. The UPS workers got something, but not enough for the sacrifice they made. And of course, we know about the railroad workers' strike, busted by the federal government. All of this woke politics and woke advertising and woke this, and if we take the commercials, we're a woke nation. This is paradise. This is a racial, ethnic paradise for all people, and we know that's not the case. But I'm very concerned with the rise of poverty, and poverty is rising, especially among children, the most vulnerable groups. But poverty is rising. Homelessness is rising. The Automobile Workers Union, I was just I'd lost track of a lot of things. Back in the days, the union would strike one of the big three, Ford, Chrysler, GM. And the workers in the other firms would work and pay into the strike fund. So you'd have 150,000, let us say, GM workers out. But the other 400,000 or 500,000 workers were paying into the strike fund. The next round, it would be the Chrysler company that would go out. I was surprised the whole automobile workers union is in the auto industry is 150,000 workers. You know, let us not forget NAFTA and all of the auto jobs going to Central and South America, and then to China, and then to Vietnam, and then to the Philippines, and then maybe to Nigeria, South Africa. But everywhere but here, the American working class is in rebellion. And this is the other thing when we talk about parties. The parties have reversed what they used to be. The Republicans have the bulk of the working class. The Democrats are a party of wealth, of the upper middle class, the more highly educated, the so-called woke. And then you add to that the military-industrial complex, the Intelligence and Security Institute. That's all the Democrats. It is not the party of Franklin Roosevelt or of John F. Kennedy. You know, and even though Robert F. Kennedy framed his leaving in a way that I thought was too, to use Cornell Western, milquetoast, the fact that he left, there was no place in the Democratic Party for him. The only reason Trump remains in the Republican Party because he has almost or literally won the battle for the party, which is a working class party in the sense of who makes it up. So, yeah, this is, so the ideological struggle, the propaganda war against the people, fake culture, whereas Marvin Gaye produces What's Going On and Mother, Mother, there's too many of us dying. Now we have a pop music, a corporate pop music that has black faces, but in essence it is anti-black. Another inconvenient truth that we have to confront.
You are right. Dr. Tony Monteiro, thank you very much. And you've got this event coming up in November that I'm really looking forward to. If you could tell our listeners about it.
Oh, yes. On November.
And we'll talk again. We'll do another show.
Yeah.
We got to talk about that event. But what is it?
It's to celebrate a figure that's not well known but should be known, named Henry Winston. This is the 50th anniversary of the publication of his book, Strategy for a Black Agenda, New Theories of Liberation in Black America and Africa. This is the 50th anniversary, and we're going to do a 2-day symposium on his work and on him. And it will be held November the 11th and 12th in Philadelphia at the First Unitarian Church here in Philadelphia. And we'll talk more about it. And Garland Nixon is going to be one of the panelists. We look forward to that, especially on a panel entitled The Crisis of Neocolonialism, which is a big topic. And I don't know that people even realize that there's a crisis of neocolonialism, especially in Africa.
Yes, that's what this whole Israel thing is about.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I mean, if they pick a fight, they're going to get a whole lot more than they asked for. You know, they're vulnerable. There are a lot of Muslims in the African continent. I'll end by saying this. The U.S. has bases all over the place. You know, we've got bases everywhere, all over Africa, all over the Middle East, with the idea that those bases will allow us to control the area, to attack anywhere we want to bomb anywhere we want to utilize coercive military power at a whim. But as my mother used to say, the same thing will make you laugh, will make you cry. Those bases are all targets.
Yes.
And in the event that this thing in Israel goes bad, which it very well could, these bases, embassies, everything. Sure, they are sitting amidst a civilization that is on fire with fury right now. I suspect a lot of those bases would be tombs for the soldiers in them.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you.
Sadly, I suspect a lot of those bases they're already starting to face attacks that if they are support the military action that is being pushed by the worst neocon forces in Washington, D.C. and Tel Aviv, if that happens, and probably London, that will be a very bad situation for the people who are in those bases. And might I add, I know people are like, well, good, they'll kill the soldiers. Always remember, the military, those are people from small towns in Georgia, in Arkansas, those are people who went in the military oftentimes because they had no economic alternative. Well, I can't afford to go to college. Where I'm from, a small town. I talked to a guy who was in the military, and I said, yeah, I said, when I was a kid, I was poor. We grew up on a dirt road. He said, a dirt road? You had a road? He said, we had a path in Alabama to get to our house. We had a road. And he said, you had to watch the path because sometimes rattlesnakes would crawl apart. And what did he do? He went in the military. And that's what you have, a military full of people who went in the military not to go around the world and blow people up, but because they saw that as the only road to advance their economic situation, because where they lived, in the area, the town, the county that they lived in, there was no industry, there was nothing. And more people are looking around, and that's their circumstances.
Absolutely.
Yes. Tony Monteiro, thank you very much. Certainly appreciate it. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much, Garland. It's a pleasure.
All righty. Dr. Tony Monteiro, always a pleasure discussing things with him. Last but not least, don't forget, you see everything scrolling across the bottom: PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, Cash App, etc. If you can contribute to the channel, certainly appreciate it. If you can't, that's fine. If you can't afford it, don't even worry about it. Then use that money for your family. Make sure that you share this on all of your social media platforms. He's a good friend of mine. He's a brilliant guy, and I really enjoy talking with him. He's a man of peace, and he's a man who stands for the working class. Very knowledgeable individual, Dr. Tony Monteiro. Thanks a lot. Peace. I'm out.